This is a video of how I quilt. I don't use a thimble and I don't use a frame. And this is how I quilt and not necessarily as others do. So this is just a suggestion. I also don't use quilting needles because I can't actually pick a needle of that length up in my hand anymore. And instead I use a sharp needle, which is almost double the length. Now, sharp needles aren't quite as strong as quilting needles, and you will find that they possibly will bend quicker or break even. But they're not terrifically expensive, so it doesn't matter. Just dispose of them safely and then have a new one. This is a quilt that I've been quilting for the last 4 months, and I've nearly finished it. My greatest asset is my table. When you quilt, you need to provide attention so that when you're quilting, you have stretched the fabric a little bit, not too much, but just a little bit, so there are no creases in it at all. I'm rubbing my finger along underneath, and you can just see that that is a lovely tension to quilt on. But I'm holding the quilt down with the heel of my right hand. Now, starting off, I don't use a knot, but I thread my needle through my quilt sandwich, and it's literally just going through the wadding and not coming out underneath on the backing. I bring my thread out and I leave this little tail just left in the side, so there's a tail of thread in there which is going to be secure. And the first stitch I do is a little back stitch, so my first quilting stitch is actually a little back stitching stitch. Now, when you quilt, you've got to imagine that your needle is going to go down at 90 degrees and come back up at 90 degrees. Now, this is physically impossible to do, but as near as possible, if you can get or think about your stitches being at a 90-degree angle, you will find that underneath your stitch will be the same length. Now, although I do a small stitch, I think this is a natural stitch for me. You're not aiming for a small stitch, you're aiming for a regular stitch. Whether it's large or small, it doesn't matter. A regular stitch is a nice stitch to look at. Something that is irregular can be picked out very quickly. So you will find that probably after the first 15 minutes of stitching, you will actually get into a regular feel for it, and all your stitches will become regular. If you're not sure about it, work on a piece of spare quilting for about 15 minutes before you start on something special, and then you'll find that everything will be okay. So I'm going to go back and do my first stitch as a little back stitch. Now, I am actually putting the point of the needle down at 90 degrees. Now, physically, if I don't move the fabric with my left hand, it's impossible for me to bring that up at a 90-degree angle. But if I move the fabric with my left hand down, it's the nearest I can get to it, and it seems to work for me. So that is my first stitch. That is my first back stitch, which secures that length of thread in there, and I'm ready to go now. Now, I normally take about 3 stitches, and as you can see, I'm manipulating the sandwich, the quilt sandwich on my left hand side all the time I'm doing it. And each time I put my needle down, it goes down at 90 degrees and back up again by manipulating the left hand side. And about 3 stitches is my limit. You'll also find that if you don't put too too many stitches on your needle at any time, your wrist and fingers aren't going to ache so much. There we are. About 3 stitches. Not brilliant. This is the first time I've quilted this morning. And once again, I find after about 5 minutes, I'm okay. Now I've literally come to something I've backstitched around. So I don't want to put my quilting stitches through it. So I'm just going to put my needle down and travel. This is what they call travelling through the middle of my sandwich, so that my needle is literally just going through the wadding, and I can bring my thread out the other side and I can continue on my way up this straight line. And when you come to the end of the row, you finish off your stitches, and then just go back and do a little back stitch and pass your needle through the centre of your sandwich like you did at the beginning. Pull out the thread and snip it off. And that's all there is to it.